Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Hugh Stewart. Tonight I'm going to be discussing the main stories with Richard Thomson, who's a Member of Parliament for Gordon, and he's waiting for us now to go over the main stories. Good evening, Richard. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening.
Right, so I'm going to, first of all, Richard, look at the main topics we've heard today from Russia's war in Ukraine, and then we'll turn on to the main stories domestically. So first of all, in Ukraine, we now come to day 181 of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has demanded a halt to nuclear sabre-rattling, as he put it, saying the world is at a maximum moment of danger and all countries with nuclear weapons must make a commitment to no first use. Moscow has requested a United Nations Security Council meeting be held on Tuesday, that's later today, to discuss the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ukrainian soldiers who were taken prisoner after a battle for Mariupol have accused Russian forces of torture during their captivity. The soldiers, who were from the Azov regiment, were released as part of a prisoner exchange, told reporters they saw soldiers being beaten until their bones were broken. The sole bridge across the strategic Dnieper River in the Russian-occupied city of Kherson was reportedly hit by US-supplied high-precision HIMARS rockets. The head of Ukraine's armed forces, General Valery Zaluzhny, has said that nearly 9,000 Ukrainian military personnel had been killed in the war with Russia. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has said that 5,587 civilians had been killed and 7,890 wounded between the 24th of February and the 21st of August, mainly from artillery, rocket and missile attacks. The US has rejected Ukraine's call for a blanket ban on visas for Russians, saying that Washington would not want to close off pathways to refuge for Russia's dissidents and others who were vulnerable to human rights abuses. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau are set to sign a deal for Canada to supply clean hydrogen to Germany. Ukraine has restored a 22-kilometre rail link to neighbouring Moldova, which could carry 10 million tonnes of freight a year, President Volodymyr Zelensky has said. Ukraine's agricultural exports are likely to rise to about 4 million tonnes in August from 3 million tonnes in July, a deputy chair of the Ukrainian Agrarian Council has said. Europe faces fresh disruption to energy supplies due to damage to a pipeline system bringing oil from Kazakhstan through Russia that was reported by the pipeline operator Caspian Pipeline Consortium on Monday. Gennady Gatilov, Russia's permanent representative to the UN in Geneva, has ruled out a diplomatic solution to ending the war in Ukraine. So that's the latest in day 181 of the war in Ukraine. So let's look at our top story today, Richard. So I'm going to look at the Energy Summit, which the First Minister hosted today. The Scottish Government's energy companies and advice organisations met at Bute House today for a summit chaired by First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. During the meeting, a consensus emerged around the next steps that must be taken by the UK Government and where further work and action will take place between the energy companies, advice organisations and the Scottish Government ahead of a follow-up meeting next month, the First Minister said. Any further increase in energy bills in October will have a profound impact on households, businesses and the public sector already struggling with the cost crisis. No single government, company or organisation can solve this crisis alone. It requires collective response commensurate to the situation, and the Scottish Government is now treating this situation as a public emergency. There was a clear consensus at today's summit that energy customers simply cannot be expected to carry the burden of further price rises in October, and that UK Government must now commit to freeze the cap for all households and to support the energy companies that deliver it. The meeting was focused on practical solutions, but without action by the UK Government to address the problem at source, the actions we discussed can only ever mitigate the impact of such a dramatic price rise at the edges. Following the meeting, participants agreed that the scale of the energy cost crisis is unprecedented, with grave consequences for consumers, and that while mitigation is vital and was the main focus of discussions, significant action is needed from the UK government to avert the crisis at source. The consensus reached at the meeting was that the UK government should, firstly, immediately cancel any further energy price increases for domestic consumers and work with the regulator and energy companies to put in support the funding to support this. Secondly, to provide significant additional support to help households and businesses meet their current energy bills and the impact of inflation more generally. The meeting also agreed to take action to protect small and medium-sized businesses and other organisations not covered by the price cap to protect them from the rising energy costs. And finally, to reform the energy market for the longer term to prevent this situation occurring again in the future. The following actions should mitigate the current situation, and they were also agreed and developed further. That would be energy companies to pursue all possible actions to provide enhanced support to consumers who are in difficulty, including working with advice agencies and the government to improve the support available to consumers and to protect customers from disconnection. It was agreed that the energy companies will work with the Scottish Government over the next 2 weeks to agree a package of measures. The Scottish Government will also provide additional support to advice agencies and consider, as part of its emergency budget review, further support for households and businesses. It will also undertake a public information campaign to promote energy efficiency measures alongside sources of help and support for those in difficulty. This group will reconvene following the announcement of the Ofgem price cap, which will be announced this Friday, the 26th of August, and also following the appointment of the new Prime Minister, which is about a week after that, to determine further specific actions. Okay, so let's turn first of all, Richard, to the language used by the Prime Minister. She's talking in terms of a national emergency. Is it time then that all politicians UK-wide too began to use that kind of dramatic language?
Well, yes, and I think that the dramatic nature of the language shows the dramatic nature of the response that's now needed. I saw an absolutely terrifying graphic earlier today on social media. Now, I don't always believe everything I read on social media for good reason, but what it was the 1 day forward price of electricity right across Europe. And predictably, the UK was sclerotic, wheezing old UK had the highest prices. Spain had some of the lowest, interestingly. But also even the Scandinavians and the Norwegians in particular, with their surfeit of renewables, particularly in pumped hydro storage, and also their larger domestic supplies of gas, were experiencing prices of several £100 per unit going forward. So I think that it's quite clear that the impact that rising energy prices is having is something that's Europe-wide, albeit some countries are better positioned to deal with it than others. We all know the major reason for that: Russia's invasion of Ukraine, disrupting supplies, the deliberate choking off those supplies. And I think, fundamentally, there's a number of changes you could make to the wholesale market. Some of those are outlined in what you've just read out. Also, I think that there's a lot that needs to be done in order to help insulate consumers from the effects of it. First and foremost, we need to be making sure that we're maximising people's income. To take this to a very local level, just last week, I went on a visit to the Citizens Advice Bureau in Turriff. Now, although it's not in my constituency, it is just up the road, and it's also got a responsibility for a significant geographical part of my constituency. And even a Citizens Advice Bureau like that, in terms of the advice they're offering, they reckon that every month they're managing to help people to maximise incomes across the area to somewhere to the tune of about £100,000 to £150,000 a month, in terms of helping people to access benefits that they didn't know they were entitled to, or that were being underpaid to them. And also in terms of helping to restructure people's finances so that they're paying less for the debts that they've been that they've run into over the previous period. So there's a lot that we can do in terms of good help and good advice to help people maximise their incomes, but there's absolutely nothing that is going to tackle the scale of the problem on the unless the UK government intervenes and intervenes big, because it has the main macroeconomic levers, it has the social security powers for the most part, and it also has the regulation of the energy industry under its auspices. Because quite frankly, if we're going to see the energy cap going up, as has been forecast, there's no amount of making sure people are claiming all the benefits that they can possibly claim is going to get folk on benefits through this. It's going to leave people, even people who are working and working very, very hard, it's going to leave them without the means in order to pay that. We're going to see very many families, by the traditional definition of fuel poverty, plunged into fuel poverty. So, yes, there are things we can do in terms of the consumer side. We should be making sure that we're not cutting people off because they lack the financial wherewithal to pay their bills. But we need to be making sure people actually have the money to pay that in the first place, and that's going to require significant intervention by the UK government as the government that has those powers. So there's a big responsibility on whoever emerges victorious from the Tory party leadership contest and is then elevated to become Prime Minister. But I think that's the fundamental part of it, is that we need to be, the way that we shift the dial on this is in terms not of the retail side of things, but the wholesale price. And the only way we can deal with the crises of rising energy prices, the looming environmental crisis that we know we face, and also to ensure our energy security is, as I've said many times on this programme before, but I make no apology for going back to it, is to deal with the energy transition, to make sure that we have a fair and just transition that preserves the expertise that we have, which allows us to exploit our hydrocarbons and not making ourselves more reliant on imports from regimes such as the Russian state, while at the same time we make that transition that we know needs to happen to renewables. So we need to be investing heavily in that, because fundamentally that's the only way we tackle, as I say, the environmental crisis, guarantee our energy security, and start to lock in lower prices for the future for hard-pressed consumers. But there is an emergency that's looming, and it needs emergency action from the new Prime Minister, whoever he or she may be, the very instant that they cross the threshold of 10 Downing Street.
Yes, so they walk into an emergency, yes, and that will be announced, of course, the end of next week, who will be the Prime Minister. But one of the policies they're being invited to explore is a long-term price cap. I was reading this morning that, in fact, the Chief of Scottish and Southern Energy, Keith Anderson, has suggested a 2-year freeze, and which is in fact going way beyond what the Labour Party has suggested. Now, what he's pointing out is that in the retailers freezing the prices that they charge to us, they're still going to have to pay higher prices to the generators. So what Scottish Southern Energy says is that there's going to be £100 billion gap. If they freeze their energy, but they're still paying more for it, then they're saying quite simply the UK government has to bridge that gap. So that's what they're saying. That's pretty radical, I would say, compared to what other politicians are saying. Well, incidentally, the idea is that it would then be repaid over a period of something like 15 to 20 years. So is that the sort of thinking we need?
It's the sort of scale of thinking that we need, but I have to say I'm disinclined to accept the second part of the equation, that it's something that gets paid back over a long period. Look, we know what the costs of energy production are, and the costs of energy production haven't gone up. This is a supply problem that's led to high prices because it can't meet the contraction of supply, can't meet the demand that's there. Now, we're in the summer period. This is a time when we're using in the Northern Hemisphere less energy generally anyway, and the crisis point comes in winter. I think that we need to make sure that everybody comes out of this okay. The energy companies that we are looking for to invest in that renewables transition, as I say, the wholesalers who are kind of in the middle there, but above all the consumers. So yes, I think it's possible to put a cap, whether you use the windfall tax mechanism or whether you use the cap mechanism or both, in order to keep prices down. That feeds through the wholesale market and down to the consumer. But fundamentally, there are excess profits being made, not because of the any particular business acumen that's being shown, although there's plenty of acumen in the energy industry, as I can testify being a North East MP. But, there is a surplus of profits that's being made here well above and beyond what anybody's reasonable expectations would be, and well above and beyond anything that is needed in order to maintain a healthy energy production market. So I think that that's the sort of scale of thinking that's needed, but I think we need to think on a bit about how much the consumer is paying, because it's too much now, and it's too much spread over a period of time going forward as well. And I think we need to recognise the extraordinary nature of the moment that we're in, and it's a step down the right way of thinking. I think that proposal from SSE, but I think more work is required on it.
Yes, so that story really focusing on the meeting of the Ofgem regulator on Friday, who are going to announce it's suspected an increase in the cap. And of course, as we reported last night, some people are thinking that the cap might go up to over 3,500 a year per households, and going up even more in 2023. So I'll just move on to the next story. But remember that summit meeting today is going to be followed up by another summit once the new Prime Minister is in place in the next week. So let's look, Richard, at our next story tonight, which is today's meeting between COSLA, that's the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, and the three trade unions representing council workers. Those are Unite, Unison and the GMB. So they met today, but no agreement was reached today at the summit meeting between COSLA and those three trade unions representing council workers. Strike action on pay, therefore, will spread beyond Edinburgh to other parts of Scotland tomorrow. COSLA, which represents all 32 council areas of Scotland, plus representatives from the three unions, GMB, Unison and Unite, met today to discuss the improved offer of 5%, which was an increase on a 3.5% on the table last week. That increase was financed by an extra £140 million provided by the Scottish Government. One issue which concerns the GMB union is whether the new offer will result in the same percentage for all workers regardless of what rate they are on now, or whether a flat rate uplift can be offered to workers on lower pay rates. Keir Greenaway, the GMB Scotland organiser, said that the flat rate award was a key part of the union's pay claim, as the prospect of the highest paid getting the biggest cash increase was unacceptable. Joanna Baxter, representing Unison in Scotland, said that there was a long meeting today, but unfortunately had not produced a breakthrough, and she said the union was still a long way away from a pay offer which they could recommend to their members. The only thing both parties could agree on, she said, was to ask the Scottish Government to put additional funding in place. The Deputy First Minister will receive a letter to that effect. They were writing it today. So workers, including refuse collectors, carers, school staff and social workers in a dozen council areas, including Glasgow, are due to go on strike tomorrow. So let's look at the details of this strike, Richard. It seemed to me last week when we heard about 3.5% being rejected, which was not surprising. I was thinking hopefully that as that's been uplifted to 5%, that looked like a basis for agreement. And it doesn't look to me too far away from agreement, but there are some aspects that I'm not happy about. Do you think the parties are that far away from agreement?
I honestly don't know, but I think that the Scottish Government has quite clearly made a significant amount of additional resource available through that 140 million. That's a resource that's not being made available without some knock-on effect. As John Swinney made clear, it's going to have an impact on other budgets and potentially commitments across the scope of the Scottish Government's activities. The really disappointing bit for me has been the way that some have sought to try and politicise this as an SNP bad thing. Now, I think it's nobody wants to see our capital city looking as it does at the moment. Particularly when the eyes of the world are upon it with the international festival there. But at the same time, I think workers are quite clearly feeling the pinch in terms of the cost of living, and they're entitled to a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Now, I think the unions are perfectly entitled to examine the small print that might come along with a proposal such as the one that's been put to them, and that's what negotiations all about. So, I don't criticise the unions for seeking the best outcome they can achieve for their members. What I'm rather annoyed and disappointed about in equal measure is the fact that within COSLA, because it's not down to individual councils to make these pay awards, it's a collective bargaining piece right across Scotland through COSLA, is that the SNP group leaders put forward, as I understand it, a proposal for a 5% settlement based around 5% a few days ago, and it was voted down by Labour and Conservative council leaders, who, remember, aren't supposed to be in any kind of coalition either within COSLA or indeed across local authorities in Scotland, if you believe Anna Sarwar, which I think you'd be wise not to, frankly, on many things. So the opportunity to thrash out some of these details has been lost over that period until the 5% deal went on the table. So I think that had COSLA group leaders, in terms of the Labour Party and Conservative representatives and anyone else who voted down the SNP proposal for 5%, had they not done so, this is an offer that could have been on the table a bit earlier, and we might actually be in a position where maybe perhaps the industrial action would be over if the unions had been able to get satisfactory answers that they were looking for over that time. Instead of which, we're now moving on, not just to, not just in terms of the length of the dispute in Edinburgh, but it's now going to spread to other local authorities in Scotland. And I think that those who voted down that funded 5% proposal within COSLA leaders need to take a long, hard look at themselves. And I think it's very, very telling. In the run-up to the Commonwealth Games, Anna Sarwar was running around everywhere he could in Glasgow to try and find something that had been fly-tipped so he could get a selfie next to it. Anna Sarwar and his selfie stick seemed to have been curiously absent from Edinburgh, perhaps a pang of conscience, although maybe he's just waiting for his opportunity. But quite frankly, I think that COSLA and the union leaders need to get their heads together to thrash out the detail of this to see whether or not this is an acceptable compromise can be met within this envelope, and see if it's possible for a deal to be done on this, because quite frankly, we don't want to see any streets anywhere in Scotland looking like those do in Edinburgh at present.
Yes, indeed. As was reported earlier on, COSLA represents 32 council areas. So last week they were tied 16-16 on whether to accept the 5% offer. So as you said, Richard, that was on the table last week. But the COSLA had to make a decision based on the casting vote of the SNP president. The other issue, of course, is at the end. Maybe the trade unions are just doing their job, as you say, but do you think there's any sense that another 140 million was made available? Are they thinking then, well, let's see how much more we can squeeze out of John Swinney, who's temporarily in charge of the Scottish Government just now, isn't he, while the Finance Secretary's on maternity leave? So do you think that's part of the trade unions thinking, well, they've moved that far, maybe we can get them to produce some more money from somewhere?
I don't know. Look, trade unions are there to bargain for the best deal that they can. And let's be clear that, workers right across local government, as they are across other parts of the public sector and indeed the private sector, are feeling the pinch. The Scottish Government has a limited amount of resource, and eventually, whatever flexibility there might be around about budget lines that aren't being fully utilised in a given year for whatever reason, eventually, when you're not fully in control of your budget, your borrowing, your fiscal levers, eventually that does start to cut into other budgets. So I think we need to be careful that in trying to reach settlements, not just in this dispute, but across other pay negotiations that will take place across Scotland's councils and government more generally, we need to be careful that we're not cutting into any further to the services that those workers are providing. But certainly, work unions are entitled to do their job and to get the best possible deal. But I think that we're probably at the limits of what can be offered in terms of the overall resource envelope for something like this. And I think it really does now come down to the questions about how it can best be applied to get the best outcomes, because fundamentally sort of spiralling pay chasing after inflation isn't going to help anyone. We need to do, as we were speaking about in the earlier item, tackle inflation at source, and that's by tackling the cost of energy, because it's the cost of energy as it's affecting consumers are driving these perfectly reasonable pay increases. It's also the cost of energy to industry that's putting up the price of everything in the shop. So fundamentally, it's tackling the cost of energy as at the core of getting inflation back under control. And of course, making sure that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot with any further trade restrictions that might come as a result of the continued bodged legacy of Brexit.
Yes, as you said earlier on. So all countries in Europe are experiencing difficulties with energy and inflation, but it seems that they're worse in the UK than they are in most other countries in Europe. So that dispute does go ahead tomorrow. We'll see if COSLA can come to any further negotiations, maybe on those details that he discussed on whether a flat rate could help to boost the pay of lower paid members. So some council workers going on strike tomorrow from one of those three unions. Richard, we'll move on to our next story now and looking at Wales. And we hear today that Plaid Cymru, two Plaid Cymru members of Parliament, who I'm sure you're familiar with, have raised questions about the anomaly where some disabled citizens in Wales are not going to be eligible for the £650 cost of living payment. So this is, although it's been raised by these two Plaid Cymru members, but it's not just only applying to Wales. Anyway, the story is Plaid Cymru's member of the Parliament, Hywel Williams, and Ben Lake MP have both written to the UK Pension Secretary, who's Therese Coffey, and the Chancellor, who's Nadeem Zahawi, saying that it's completely unacceptable that disabled people are ineligible for a UK government £650 cost of living payment. Despite having additional energy needs, disabled people are being offered a pitiful sum, as they put it, of £150. Mr Williams and Mr Lake say that they're calling for an urgent revision of the criteria. Now, excuse me, my confusion earlier on concerns the fact that the payments involved are being phased out in Scotland, but some areas in Scotland are still receiving the legacy payments. But the situation is that your colleagues in Westminster, well, here's the letter they've written to Therese Coffey and to the Chancellor. They're saying that people receiving the various new style payments and support allowances and the new job seekers allowance are excluded from the cost of living payment, and so are people on the legacy personal independence payments. Now, they make the point that many disabled people have additional energy needs. So not only are they subject to the price rises everyone else is paying, but people who, for instance, need ventilators or need to charge wheelchairs or other equipment, or maybe people who have to keep warmer than average, are having to use their energy a lot more intensively than maybe other households. And as they say, failing to increase to include them in the £650 uplift means that people are struggling between eating or continuing to use life-saving equipment. So they finish up by saying, we copy in Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak to whoever wins, and it's crucial that whoever is the next Chancellor and Work and Pension Secretary put disabled and vulnerable people at the forefront of the cost of living response. So have you had any discussion with those MPs on this strange exclusion of the £650 uplift by those people who need it more than anybody else?
No, I haven't. Obviously, Westminster's on recess at the moment, and while I regularly speak to both Hywel and Ben when we're all in Westminster, obviously Plaid and the SNP have worked very closely together over a number of years. That's not an opportunity I've had over the last few weeks, but I think it's an interesting anomaly that they've picked up. Of course, people with disabilities in general can often end up with higher heating bills than those who do not have disabilities. Now, obviously, as I say, that is something of a generalisation, but it's generally the case that it's true. And it seems to me to be a matter of basic fairness that everybody should be entitled to a full level of support for the needs that they have and to get that support from government without having to unnecessarily justify themselves. So without knowing the detail of it, I would want to make sure that any payment that is made in order to ensure that people without disabilities are able to meet their financial outgoings, and we've discussed in an earlier item in the programme how everybody's most likely going to be in a situation where that isn't the case at the moment. We certainly shouldn't be leaving anyone with a disability behind in that. So as I say, it's without knowing the exact detail of it, we would want people to be treated fairly as a matter of principle, and if that's not what's happening here, then it's something that should be addressed, and addressed quickly.
Yep, so as they said, as Hywel Williams and Ben Lake have said, using less energy is simply not an option for many disabled people. So that's a story that for some bizarre reason, as I think you said, Richard, people on certain disability benefits are not eligible for a £650 cost of living payment. So the UK government's been urged to put that anomaly right. Now let's move on to another Scottish story which has been reported really over the last 5 years. It's the story of a Scottish man who's been detained in India since 2017. Now the Member of Parliament of the Scottish chap, who is Jagtar Singh Johal, who's been detained in India for nearly 5 years now, said the UK government has serious questions to answer over claims that the UK intelligence agencies supplied information which led to his constituents' abduction and torture. So Scottish Sikh Jagtar Singh Johal, or Jaggy as he is known to his friends, was arrested in India at his wedding in November 2017, accused of helping to fund a Sikh on Hindu assassination plot, which is something he and his family strongly deny. Lawyers for Mr Johal have lodged a complaint against the UK government after a human rights group, Reprieve, uncovered evidence suggesting that MI5 and MI6 passed information about a UK national to foreign authorities, who then declaimed and tortured them. And this matches the details in Mr Johal's case. An investigation by a United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention ruled in May that there was no legal basis for Jagtar's detention in India, citing multiple violations of human rights, including claims that he was tortured into signing a false confession through electric shocks to his earlobes, nipples and genitals. The family's MP is Martin Doherty Hughes, your colleague in the SNP, describes these allegations that the UK government may have colluded in the torture of a UK citizen by a foreign government as astonishing. The MP for West Dunbartonshire met in June with Foreign Secretary Liz Truss to raise Jagtar's case and has pledged to continue pressing the UK government to secure justice for Jaggy. Commenting, Martin Doherty Hughes said, "This is a truly astonishing and unanticipated development in Jagtar's case, which raises massive questions not only for his family in Dumbarton and for millions of UK citizens who travel to India regularly, but also for those who study the UK foreign policy in practice. If proven, these allegations risk destroying whatever confidence Britain's Sikh and other minority populations had in the security services, and by extension calls into question what value the UK government saw in this shadowy transaction." I wonder if this is hinting or suggestions. I don't know if we have absolute 100% proof that Jagtar Johal was in fact fingered by the UK security services. What's your feeling? Is this a suspicion, or is this something that they're definitely guilty of? Yep. Hello, Richard. Can you hear me? Is the sound still?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Yes, I'm wondering. Martin Doherty Hughes seems to think this. It looks definite that MI5, MI6 have passed information to the Indian authorities. And there is documentary evidence linking that. Okay. Have you any background information? Have you spoken to Martin on this at all?
No, I don't. I mean, Martin has been an energetic and diligent campaigner on behalf of his constituent here, of Jagtar Singh Johal, and it's an absolutely horrifying ordeal that Jaggy has been put through. I mean, to be arrested off the street as he was in 2017, and to spend that time in custody with no obvious legal basis for his detention, facing the death penalty, and with his friends and family back at home absolutely worried sick about his welfare and his prospects. So you can only imagine what that's done to the poor man's mental health over that time, not to mention the fact that he's effectively now lost 5 years of his life in Indian custody. So, Martin Doherty Hughes is MP, as I say, has been a tireless campaigner for him. He regularly raises his issue in the House of Commons to try and get a response out of the UK government, who, you would think might have some persuasive powers over their counterparts in the Indian government over this. But I'm not across the detail of the revelation. But I think to find that the UK government may have been, or agencies of the UK government may have been involved in providing the evidence. I'll use that word in inverted commas, but providing the the information, good or bad, that was the stimulus to this action by the Indian state in order to detain Jaggi is really quite remarkable, and all the more so for having taken this length of time to come to pass. And I think it does call into question if the UK government did provide that information, just how effective or genuine any efforts have been made since then by the UK government, to secure Jagtar's release. So a surprising and alarming revelation, and one that I'm sure Martin will be seeking to follow up with urgency as soon as we're back at Westminster, if not earlier, by whatever means are at his disposal.
Yep, and he'll be raising that, no doubt, with whoever takes over as Foreign Secretary, if, as anticipated, Liz Truss gets the big job. So I'll just repeat Martin. Dr. Hugh says, if proven, these allegations risk destroying confidence in British government's foreign policy. So let's leave that there. Let's look at another story which we've covered before from America. Now, this really concerns the Donald Trump's, the repercussions of Donald Trump failing to accept that he lost the election 2 years ago, because we heard that a jury today has convicted 2 men of conspiring to kidnap the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer. This was in 2020, and a plot which prosecutors described as a rallying cry for the US civil war by anti-government extremists. This was the second trial for Adam Fox and Barry Croft Jr. following the trial in April, which could not reach a unanimous verdict, and 2 other men were acquitted at that time, and 2 more pleaded guilty and testified on behalf of the prosecution. The jury today also found that the pair were guilty of conspiring to obtain a weapon of mass destruction, namely a bomb, to blow up a bridge to stymie the police if the kidnapping could be pulled off at Miss Whitmer's vacation home. Croft, who's 46, a trucker from Bear, Delaware, was also convicted of another explosive charge. You can't just strap on an AR-15 and body armour and go and snatch the governor, Assistant US Attorney Niels Kessler told the jurors. But that wasn't the defendant's ultimate goal, Kessler said. They wanted to set off a second American Civil War, a second American Revolution, something that they called the Boogaloo. And they wanted to do it for a long time before they settled on Governor Whitmer. The investigation began when Army vet Dan Chappell joined a Michigan paramilitary group and became alarmed when he heard talk about killing police. He agreed to become an FBI informant and spent the summer of 2020 getting close to Fox and others, secretly recording conversations and participating in drills at shoot houses, as they called them, in Wisconsin and Michigan. The FBI turned it into a major domestic terror case with 2 more informants and 2 more undercover agents embedded in the group. Fox, Croft and others, accompanied by the government operatives, travelled to North Michigan to see Whitmer's vacation home at night and the bridge which could be destroyed. Gretchen Whitmer has blamed ex-President Donald Trump for stoking mistrust and refusing to condemn hate groups and right-wing extremists like those charged in the plot. Well, Richard, I remember commenting at the time when these guys were arrested, and so it's very good to see that a conviction and has gone through and justice has been done. In our report there, we have linked to the Donald Trump, as I did earlier on. Do you see this as part of the kind of general Trumpist? What is he trying to do? Is he trying to spread suspicion against the American state? Is he trying to destabilise democracy? Can you see the hand of Trump behind nutty plots like this?
Not directly, no, but I think what Mr. Trump deserves to be held accountable for is the way that he tries to disrupt the public space with misinformation, by agitating people, by trying to call into question the legitimacy of a government which was elected fairly and squarely with more votes than he himself was able to garner. What's his end game in this? I don't know. I'm not even sure Mr. Trump would necessarily know himself. I think a lot of it is just about trying to stay in the public eye, keep some attention, keep some relevance as he might see it, and if not to secure the Republican presidential nomination for the next presidential election, then to put himself in a position whereby he's some kind of kingmaker and still holds some kind of relevance. But I think all politicians, no matter what level we operate at, have to take responsibility for the language that we use, and not just the language that we use in its own terms, but the effect that an impact that can go on to have on others who might take their cue from that. And I think that when you're constantly telling people that they are downtrodden, that they're being that other people are taking advantage of them, that everybody's conspiring against them, their interests, their families' interests, their country's interests. Inevitably, when somebody with that kind of position and standing and authority in public life says it often enough, there are going to be people who start to believe it, and the danger is that they start to behave in ways such as such as were outlined in the prosecution case in this trial. We've seen it closer to home with the appalling murders of Joe Cox and David Amos, and we see it. We see it in terms of some of the social media debate, but it can inspire. Words are words. They they have an impact, but at the same time, sometimes there are people who can be driven beyond merely offering public comment on issues and affairs and people, and can be driven to other things. So, if you're not happy with the way politics are, you can get involved, you can join a political party, you can stand for election, you can cast your vote, you can say your piece, you can write to the newspapers. There's all sorts, you can get involved in campaign groups. There's all sorts of ways that you can get involved and try and bring about change for the better in line with what your values and beliefs are. But the things that you can never do are use violence to influence that, or in this case, as was alleged, try and kidnap somebody. And I think that that's the very real danger, is that the politicians in all parts of the world of all stripes need to have great care in how they measure the words that they use, so that we're not inadvertently giving succour to people who might go on and do things that nobody wants to see, simply because they believe that they're entitled to do it, and that there's no alternative to that kind of action, and because they believe that it will give them some kind of status if they do it. We need to be very, very mindful of that, and to make sure that the debate is it can be robust. It ought to be robust, but it should be respectful, and it should be at all times anchored to truth.
Yep, so as you said, Donald Trump is not directly implicated in this particular harebrained plot, but Gretchen Whitmer herself has said that the general atmosphere of mistrust that he spreads does tend to give succour and support to people who think they're fighting some sort of revolution. Okay, now let's move on to a good news story. Student nurse Owami Davis, who had been missing for nearly 7 weeks, has been found safe and well, say the Metropolitan Police in London. DCI Nigel Penny from Forces Specialist Crime Command said, "This is clearly the outcome we were hoping for. The finding of the missing lady, Owami Davis, I'd like to say that she has been found safe and well outside the London area in the county of Hampshire, and she's currently with specialist officers from my team." He added, "She looks in good health, she's in a place of safety, and not currently in the vulnerable state that we were led to believe she was at the start of her disappearance." The Met Commander Paul Brogden said that all aspects of the investigation were to be reviewed to assess whether there was any learning that we need to take from how it was handled. Despite the arrest of 5 people and numerous appeals for information, officers had struggled to locate Miss Davis as they trawled through 117 reported sightings. Miss Davis had last been seen on the 7th of July after leaving her family home in Grays, Essex, on the 4th of July, having told her mother that she was going to the gym. She was found asleep in a doorway in Clarendon Road, Croydon, on the 6th of July while waiting for a friend, but told Metropolitan Police officers that she did not need help, and she left. Her family had reported her disappearance, but Davison had not been marked as a missing person on a police database at that time. Ms. Brogden said that this would be among the aspects of the case to be looked at in a review of the investigation. Both Mr. Brogden and Penny said that they were ecstatic at the outcome of the case, with the Met Commander adding, "More importantly, I'm pleased for Owami's mother and her brother." 5 people were arrested and bailed in connection with her disappearance, 2 on suspicion of murder and 3 on suspicion of kidnap, but police said there was no evidence that she had come to harm. The Met have confirmed that all 5 were released but are still on police bail, with a decision on what would happen next following a full debrief. An odd story this, but good news that the woman involved in it seems to have come to no harm and appears to be in good health. But is this again a story that shines the light on the Met and whether they're prioritising vulnerable citizens, including women who may be preyed on?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know that anyone does at the moment. Now, let's just confine ourselves, I think, or it would be wise to confine ourselves at this moment to say that it's an incredible relief that she's been found safe and well. That's something that must come as an incredible relief to her family, her friends, and all those who love and care for her, and indeed everyone who's taken an interest in Owami's welfare over this time. We don't know the story behind this, and I suspect we might never find out the full story. And it's maybe there's a story there that's none of our business to know. But I think there may well be lessons to learn from the police response. But certainly, I think it's clear that there was a huge effort to find her. There were 117 sightings, which all needed to be investigated. I think over 50,000 hours of CCTV footage was scrutinised as part of the investigation. Did all the things that need to happen in a police investigation happen as they needed to and as quickly as they needed to? Those are some of the lessons that I think it would be wise to try and learn. But as I say, this is a story we may never get to find out how what went on, and but I think that it's a relief that Owami's been found safe, and let's just allow people to get on with doing what they need to now, and allow people to get on with their investigations, and that's the public bit of it. But the private bit is to make sure that Owami continues to be safe and gets any support that she might need.
Yes, as you say, some of what went on might well be none of our business, but at least it's good news that she has been found safe and well, and the Met have said that they will look into how they handled the case. But that's interesting to know, Richard, that a lot of police time was put into it anyway, so nobody's suggesting that they ignored it, but maybe they should look at whether they put people on the missing persons registered sooner, but they will. That's going to be looked into. So at least Owami is well. Next story now. An estimated 79 extra full-time mental health officers, that's MHOs, are needed to meet the shortfall in the workforce across local authorities in Scotland. That figure was revealed in a new report published by the Scottish Social Services Council today. That's the SSSC. The number of local authorities reporting a shortfall in the MHO workforce had increased to 26 from 23 last year. Local authorities reported a shortfall an estimated 2,840 hours were required each week, which is up 49% on the previous year. Most local authorities saw either no rise in the shortfall or a shortfall remaining the same. However, 14 areas did see an increase. One large local authority, Glasgow, now accounts for 25% of the overall shortfall. MHOs are specially trained social workers who carry out statutory duties in relation to the mental health legislation. The reported shortfalls in staffing could result in delays to people accessing services, appropriate treatment and care, and hospital discharges. The COSLA and the Scottish Government launched the National Workforce Strategy for Health and Social Care in March of this year and highlighted that the shortfall in MHO capacity has been growing in recent years. The Scottish Government and COSLA have responded by introducing mental health officer training building. I'll just repeat that. It's a mental health officer capacity building training grant scheme to help local authorities train additional MHOs. The report shows a further growth in the shortfall. Okay, so is this a resource issue again, Richard? I was saying that there's a recognition that more trained staff are needed. Is it just that we need to find more money to train these people, or is there a shortage in the workforce who can be trained for these specialist roles?
Simple answer is I don't know. I think obviously we rightly have a renewed and increased focus on the importance of mental health, both maintaining it, understanding that it's okay sometimes not to be okay, and just to get people to grasp that mental health is an issue that affects everybody, and that will all of us in our lives go through periods, maybe quite quickly, maybe more gradually, of being, quite in control of things, and sometimes feeling, quite hopeless, and or just a bit down about things, and that kind of movement between states of being, if you like, is perfectly normal and a natural part of life. But no, I think there's absolutely no doubt that there is that renewed recognition of the importance of mental health and helping people through periods of poorer mental health, and that having people who are qualified to help people to get through that is and to help others to help people get through that is of huge import. Now, there could be any number of reasons why there is a shortfall. It could come down to recruitment. It could come down to a lack of qualified people coming through the system. I suspect resource, as it so often does, will come down to a part of this as well. So I think it's having identified the shortfall and understanding the importance. I think it would be wise for government and our local authorities, the NHS integrated joint boards, to take a look at how those needs are being met at present, and to, as I say, just decide, is that the best way those needs can be met, and what scope is there for bringing more professionals into the field in order to help with the as I say, the renewed and I think proper awareness that we have of the importance of mental health and helping people back to that. Because the thing about mental health is, or one of the many things about people who are suffering from poor mental health, is you can present at a GP, because that's the obvious place you would go to when you're not feeling right, and a GP can prescribe an antidepressant for you. Sometimes it can take a long time to get the antidepressant, the correct drug, and the correct balance of that drug. And again, but is it tackling the root cause of the problem? Sometimes those antidepressants are very, very helpful in terms of stabilizing people, helping people to get back to some kind of equilibrium that they can live with. Whereas for other people, they'll need other services such as counselling and other forms of support. So I think we need to look at the wraparound care that we give people in terms of how we help people to maintain good mental health, but also how we help people back from the whether that's crisis point or something that is debilitating to that individual but hasn't reached what would normally be termed as a crisis, because otherwise it's people's family, friends, loved ones, and other parts of the public sector that end up dealing with often the aftermath of that. And the more that we can do to help people to maintain a good state of well-being and to get back to that state of well-being when they're no longer in it, I think is very important. And if it takes more people fulfilling that role, then I think that's something that should be looked at fully.
Okay, but the story does say, of course, that as I said at the end, that COSLA have a new scheme available where local authorities can apply for funding to train up more mental health officers. Right? So let's move on, Richard, to our final story tonight, and this is a good news story to end on. SSE Renewables and its partner Total Energies has announced the first power generation from the Sea Green offshore wind farm, which is 27 kilometres off the coast of Angus. The first Vestas turbine out of a total of 114 was commissioned and connected to the grid in the early hours of Monday morning. The 1,075 megawatt wind farm is expected to be fully operational in the first half of 2023. The £3 billion Sea Green project will be Scotland's largest offshore wind farm and the world's deepest fixed bottom wind farm, with its deepest foundation due to be installed at 59 metres below sea level this December. The 1,075 megawatt Sea Green offshore wind farm project is, no, I said that already, sorry, it's located off Angus. Now, the $3 billion joint venture is between Total Energies, who have 51% of it, and SSE Renewables, who have 49%. Sea Green will be Scotland's largest and the world's deepest offshore wind farm when complete. Paul Cooley, the Director of Global Offshore Wind for SSE Renewables, said, Seagreen has achieved a number of key milestones to date, but to see this turbine turning in the North Sea and to have reached its first power safely is a fantastic achievement for everyone connected to the project, which has brought benefits to the local community, to the UK supply chain, and once completed, Seagreen will make a significant contribution to Scotland and to the UK's ambitious renewable energy targets. Total Energies entered into an agreement with SSE in June 2020. Seagreen has an installed capacity, as we said, of 1,075 megawatts. When fully operational, this site will produce around 5 terawatt hours of renewable electricity, and that's enough to power 1.6 million households. So that's a remarkable project, isn't it? This one project produces enough electricity to do about a third of Scotland. So you mentioned earlier on diversifying our electricity supply. Clearly renewables and wind is obviously a major way of going there, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, and I think that offshore wind is clearly where there's tremendous opportunities. I mean, I'm just doing the maths there. I wouldn't claim to have it completely accurate, but that sounds to me pretty much like the same sort of output as Torness nuclear power station in East Lothian, maybe just slightly under that. But nevertheless, in terms of being able to provide power for 1.6 million homes, that just shows the scale of the investment, the scale of the construction, the scale of the output. And of course, we've got much more of that to come from the overall Scotland licence that's of 25 gigawatts of installed capacity that's been licensed by the Scottish Government through the devolved Crown estate. So, yeah, this is exactly the sort of thing we need to do. And as I've said at the top of the programme, this is the sort of investment we need, not just to build expertise in Scotland. And I regret that we're not manufacturing more of the kit that's here, but we're certainly developing the expertise and setting the example. But I think the most immediate benefit that this starts to bring is it increases our energy security. It can help to contribute to the lower energy prices, so long as the UK government changes the frankly harebrained way that it allows the energy market to operate at the moment, setting electricity in line with the wholesale price of gas. So this is great, but we need a lot more of it, and we need it quickly. But this is the way that the direction that we need to travel in order to make sure that we're tackling the climate crisis, securing our energy supplies into the future, and in terms of once again making energy affordable for businesses and consumers the length and breadth of the country.
Yeah, so I'm reminded of the slogan way back in the 60s, people were going electric, then we went into North Sea gas, so maybe we have to go back to electric again. That really seems to be what's happening, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely is, because we've got to decarbonise people's heating and domestic consumption. I mean, the three sort of lowest hanging fruits that we can chase after at the moment in terms of climate change are decarbonise domestic heating, try and decarbonise industry, and decarbonise transport. And one way or another, hydrogen has a role to play in all of these objectives and endeavours to some extent. But I think in most cases, the slack's going to be taken up by electricity rather. And but even in terms of the hydrogen production, you want to be producing it from clean, green sources, and that involves electricity. So it's not so much a dash for gas, but we need to elect for electricity.
Okay, so electricity is the miracle power of the past and of the future. Right, Richard Thomson, MP, it's been a pleasure to have you on the programme. It's always interesting to hear what you have to say. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for us tonight, so thanks for watching. But before I go, can I just remind you that we at Broadcasting Scotland depend on the generosity of our supporters, and I know I'm speaking to a number of you now, so thank you. So to everyone who has donated and everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. You are keeping us on the air. At Broadcasting Scotland, our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and there's our website below the screen. We've set ourselves a target of finding another 10,000 subscribers to enable us to employ staff and therefore make more programmes. So it's over to you, and please pass us on if you know of somebody who might want to watch Broadcasting Scotland and get an alternative view from programmes made right here in Glasgow, covering the whole of Scotland. And please pass the word on. But that's it from me and from Richard Thomson MP, so good night and thank you for watching. I'll be back tomorrow.